Memory is a traitorous architect. It builds rooms you swear were real, furnishes them with the velvet of half-remembered laughter, hangs portraits of smiles that may have been masks all along. It constructs a past for you to live in, a sanctuary. And you believe in it. You walk its halls, you touch its solid walls, you breathe its perfumed air, because the alternative is to admit you've been living in a blueprint, a ghost of a house that was never truly built. My house, the one memory built for me, was a masterpiece of domestic bliss. Its name was Amelia. I used to believe we were a diptych, Amelia and I. Two separate panels, intricately carved, but making sense only when joined. People saw us and, I imagined, felt a pang of something, envy, aspiration, perhaps just the quiet recognition of a rare thing. We were that couple. The ones who hosted dinner parties where the wine flowed as freely as the conversation, whose shared glances across a crowded room held entire novels. The kind of couple whose laughter was the home's true foundation, its echoes settling in the rafters like contented doves. That was the story I told myself. It was a beautiful story, and for a long time, it was the only one I needed. I met her when my life was a frantic scramble up a crumbling cliff face. My business, a fledgling tech venture I'd christened Nexus Dynamics, was less a company and more a collection of anxieties held together by caffeine and sheer, boneheaded refusal to fail. I was living on lukewarm coffee and the fumes of ambition. There were days I'd stare at the ceiling of my cramped apartment, the weight of payroll and investor expectations pressing down on me like a physical force, and think, just let it go. Go get a real job. A safe job. Then, she walked into a miserable little coffee shop where I was trying to poach a potential client. She wasn't part of the meeting. She was just there, a splash of impossible color in a sepia world. She was reading a well-worn copy of 100 Years of Solitude, and her brow was furrowed in concentration. When she looked up and her eyes met mine, a smile bloomed on her face, a genuine, unbidden thing that seemed to rearrange the very light in the room. It was a smile that could disarm armies, let alone a cynical, sleep-deprived entrepreneur. She believed in me. It's a simple phrase, but it holds the weight of a universe. She saw past the frayed collar of my shirt and the dark circles under my eyes. She saw the vision I could barely articulate myself. She'd listened for hours as I sketched out algorithms on napkins, her chin propped on her hand, her gaze unwavering. She didn't just listen, she heard. She gave me hope, a transfusion of it, right into the heart. For that, I swore an oath to myself, a silent, solemn vow to build a world for her, to cherish the light she'd brought into my darkness. In the beginning, before Nexus Dynamics became a behemoth, our lives were a tapestry woven from the mundane. We turned chores into rituals. Grocery shopping was an adventure, a quest for the perfect avocado. Binge-watching terrible romantic comedies on a rainy Sunday was our sacred communion, our feet tangled together under a soft blanket. Laundry day was my favorite. I loved watching her fold towels. It was an art form, a precise, meditative process. The corners had to be perfect, the final fold a crisp, satisfying rectangle. It's the little bit of order I can impose on a chaotic universe, she'd say, her expression serious. You're obsessed, I tease, deliberately messing up a pillowcase I was attempting to fold. She'd laugh, a sound like wind chimes, and call me a hopeless barbarian. This is why you handle the big picture, Jonathan. And I handle the towels. Those moments were the bricks and mortar of my memory palace. They were simple, yes, but they were ours. They were the currency of our love, small denominations that, when added up, felt like a fortune. I was rich in her laughter, wealthy in the comfortable silence we could share. Success doesn't arrive like a polite guest. It kicks down the door, tracks mud on the carpet, and rearranges all the furniture. When Nexus Dynamics finally took off, it was explosive. A key patent was approved, a major corporation bought into our flagship software, and suddenly, the frantic scramble became a rocket launch. The name Jonathan Hale went from a footnote in tech blogs to a headline in business journals. Our lives changed. The cramped apartment gave way to a sprawling house in the Greenbelt suburbs, the one she'd pointed out in a magazine years ago. Look at those windows, she'd sighed, tracing the picture with her finger. You could read by that light all day. So I bought it for her. The house with the big bay windows and the perfect, sun-drenched reading nook. I had it furnished by an interior designer she admired, filled its custom-built shelves with first editions of her favorite authors. I bought her a car that purred, jewelry that glittered, a life she'd only dreamed of. I thought I was giving her the world. I was crowning my queen. The supportive wife who had stood by the struggling dreamer now had her kingdom. But success is a jealous god. It demands sacrifice. My time, once a resource we shared lavishly, became a luxury I could no longer afford. The days of lingering over coffee were replaced by 6 a.m. conference calls with Tokyo. The lazy Sunday afternoons were consumed by strategy meetings and weekend work sessions. Business trips, once an exciting novelty, became a relentless cycle of airports, hotel rooms, and boardrooms. London, Singapore, Berlin, they all blurred into one long, sterile corridor. "It's for us," I'd murmur into her hair late at night. When I finally crept into bed, the scent of stale airplane air still clinging to me. For our future, just a little longer. And Amelia, my Amelia, would always seem to understand. She'd smile, a little sleepily, and trace the line of my jaw. "I know, darling. I'm proud of you." Or so I thought. Looking back now, through the smoke and rubble of what came after, I can see the fault lines. They were there all along, fine as hairline cracks in a porcelain doll. I just didn't want to see them. I was too busy admiring the doll. There were the little things, the subtle shifts in emotional tectonics. The way she'd sometimes pull away from my touch, a fractional, almost imperceptible stiffening, as if my hand was a stranger's. It would be gone in a second, replaced by a warm smile. But the initial chill lingered in my memory, a tiny shard of ice. Then there was the phone. Her phone, which had once been a shared object of casual disregard, became a fortress. It was always angled away from me, its screen quickly dimmed when I entered a room. Her eyes would light up at a notification, a secret, private sunbeam, followed by a quick, guilty glance in my direction if she caught me looking. I'd ask who it was. "Oh, just my sister," she'd say, or a notification from that silly shopping app. And I, the master architect of my own delusion, would nod and believe her. The girls' nights out began to multiply. They started innocently enough, dinner with a friend, a movie, a book club meeting. But they grew more frequent, stretched later into the night. The excuses became more elaborate, the details a little too perfect. A friend's sudden crisis, a last-minute birthday celebration. I'd call her late, worried, and she'd answer with the sound of clinking glasses and loud music in the background, her voice a little too bright, a little too strained. "Having so much fun. Don't wait up, love." I ignored the dissonance. I told myself I was being paranoid, possessive. I was the one who was never home. How could I begrudge her a social life? I was the successful man, the provider. This was the price. And Amelia loved me. The Amelia who had folded my laundry and believed in my half-baked dreams would never betray me. That was the central pillar of my entire world. If that fell, everything fell. So I reinforced it with denial, plastered over the cracks with willful ignorance. I wanted to believe in us so badly that I blinded myself. There is one memory that stands out now, scrubbed clean of all its original warmth and left stark and haunting, like a bare tree in a winter landscape. It was our 5th wedding anniversary. Last year. I'd planned it for weeks, a grand romantic gesture to compensate for my long absences. I was trying to prove, to her and to myself, that the man she married was still in there, buried under layers of corporate strategy and stock options. I booked a private table at L'Etoile, her favorite French restaurant, the one perched atop the city's tallest building, with a view that made the world below look like a spill of scattered diamonds. I'd arranged for a string quartet to play the piece from the first movie we ever saw together. I had a vintage bottle of her favorite champagne on ice. She looked beautiful, of course. She always did. She wore a sapphire blue dress that matched her eyes, the one I'd bought for her in Paris. But the dress was just a costume. The woman inside it was a stranger. Her laughter was forced, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. Her smile was a shadow of itself, a pale imitation of the one that had captured me in that coffee shop. She was distracted, her gaze drifting over my shoulder to the glittering cityscape, but it was as if she were looking past it, searching for something or someone else. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" I asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. Her fingers were cold. She pulled her hand back a little too quickly, then seemed to realize her mistake and laced her fingers with mine, squeezing. "I'm fine, really. Just a bit tired. It's been a long week." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. But her eyes told a different story. They were distant, veiled. The connection between us, that invisible thread that had always bound us together, felt frayed, almost severed. A gnawing feeling twisted in my gut, a primal instinct screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. I should have pressed her. I should have called her on the lie, demanded the truth, there and then, under the light of 1,000 city stars. I should have listened to my gut. But I didn't. I let it go. Well, I said, raising my champagne flute with a determined smile. Let's not be tired tonight. To us. To 5 years, and to 50 more. To us, she echoed, her voice a whisper. But she didn't meet my eyes when she drank. I spent the rest of the evening overcompensating, telling stories, making jokes, trying to coax her genuine laugh out of hiding. I thought I could fix it with effort, with love. I thought love was enough to weather any storm, to bridge any distance. I mistook a chasm for a simple crack in the pavement. Now, sitting here in the wreckage, replaying that night, I feel like the world's biggest fool. How could I not see it? How could I be so intimately familiar with the curve of her spine, the sound of her breathing in her sleep, the scent of her hair, yet be so completely oblivious to the geography of her heart? The clues were all there, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to a truth I refused to find. I thought I knew her. I thought we were partners, a team, a single entity. But the woman I loved, the woman I would have burned down cities for, had been slipping away from me, moving silently out of the house of our marriage while I was too busy fortifying its walls against outside threats, never realizing the danger was already inside. And yet, even now, a traitorous part of me clings to the good times. To the memory of her real laughter, the warmth of her hand in mine during a late-night walk, the quiet contentment of our early days. I don't want to believe that it was all a lie, a performance. I don't want to believe that the woman who held me together during the hardest times of my life is capable of this. But deep down, I know. The truth is a relentless, ugly thing. The cracks were not just cracks. They were the beginnings of a complete structural collapse. And I had been too blind, too arrogant, too busy building a future for us to notice that our present had already crumbled to dust. There are days that are etched into your timeline not with ink, but with acid. They burn a permanent groove, a demarcation point. Before and after. My day of reckoning started like any other Tuesday, or at least it held the promise of one. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., the sky outside our bedroom window still a bruised purple. Amelia was a soft, warm lump under the duvet, her breathing deep and even. I leaned down and kissed her shoulder, a routine gesture, an automatic transaction of affection. She murmured something in her sleep, a faint, incoherent sound. I pulled on a suit, my mind already churning with the day's main event. The final negotiations for the Kaido Corp deal. This wasn't just a deal, it was a legacy project. A multi-million-dollar acquisition that would catapult Nexus Dynamics into a new stratosphere. It was the culmination of a year of grueling work, of sleepless nights and transatlantic flights. Securing it felt like the final validation of every sacrifice I'd made. At the office, the air was thick with a nervous, electric energy. Richard, my ever-faithful, ever-anxious assistant, paced outside the boardroom, clutching a stack of files like a shield. They're already in there, Jonathan, he whispered, his eyes wide. Kaido's legal team flew in this morning. They look severe. Good, I said, straightening my tie. Let them be severe. We've got this. The meeting was a marathon of attrition. 12 hours of dense legal jargon, of posturing and tactical concessions. We debated clauses, argued percentages, and stared each other down across a vast, polished mahogany table that felt like a battlefield. But I was in my element. This was a language I understood. By 6 p.m., we had a provisional agreement. I was on cloud 9, walking back to my office with a triumphant grin. My mind was already racing ahead, planning the celebration. I'd surprise Amelia, not with another piece of jewelry, but with something real. A trip. That vacation to Santorini she'd been dreaming of, the one with the whitewashed villas clinging to the cliffs. I could already picture her face. That's when my phone rang. It was Richard. His voice was strained, tinged with a panic that instantly dissolved my euphoria. Jonathan, I'm so sorry to bother you, but the supplementary annex, the one with the final patent schematics? It's not in the folder. My blood ran cold. The file. The damn file. Appendix C. The one document that provided irrefutable proof of our proprietary technology. Without it, the deal was just a handshake based on trust, and Kaido Corp didn't trust their own mothers. I'd been working on it late last night at home. In my carelessness, I'd left it on my desk in the study. Shit. I breathed, my initial frustration a hot wave of self-recrimination. But it quickly morphed into determined action. The final signing wasn't until the next morning. I had time. I'm heading home to get it, I told Richard. I'll be back in an hour. I called Amelia on the way, wanting to let her know I'd be stopping by. No answer. Straight to voicemail. That wasn't entirely unusual. She often left her phone on silent when she was painting or reading. Still, that little voice, the one I'd been so good at ignoring, whispered a disquieting question in the back of my mind. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as always. Quiet, welcoming, solid. Our fortress. But as I walked up the stone steps, an uneasy feeling began to creep over me, a subtle wrongness in the air, like a single, discordant note in a familiar symphony. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Amelia. I called out. The house was still. Too still. Then I heard it. A faint sound, floating down from the second floor. Laughter. For a split second, I smiled. Relief washed over me. Maybe she had a friend over. Maybe her sister had dropped by. I pictured her curled up on the sofa in our sitting room, laughing at some silly joke, and the tension in my shoulders eased. But then I heard another laugh. Deeper. Male. And unmistakably familiar. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. The blood drained from my face. The laughter was coming from upstairs. From our bedroom. I don't remember making a conscious decision to move. My feet, disconnected from my mind, just carried me. Up the plush carpeted stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The closer I got, the more the uneasiness grew, wrapping around my chest like a vice, squeezing the air from my lungs. Each step was a lifetime. Each creak of the floorboards was a gunshot in the silence. The door to our bedroom was ajar. Through the crack, I could see shadows dancing on the far wall, two silhouettes merging and separating in the soft lamplight. I felt a wave of nausea. Asterisk no. It can't be. You're imagining it. You're stressed. Asterisk. I pushed the door. It swung open silently, and the world as I knew it did not just crack. It vaporized. It ceased to exist. Amelia was there, on our bed, on the sheets I'd slept on just that morning. Her back was to me, her shoulders shaking with laughter. Her face, which I could see in the reflection of the large vanity mirror, was alight with a kind of uninhibited joy I hadn't seen in months. A raw, ecstatic pleasure that twisted my insides into a knot of cold fury. And with her was Maxwell, my childhood friend, my best man, the man I had trusted like a brother. Time has a way of fragmenting in moments of trauma. It shatters into a million sharp-edged shards. I stood in the doorway for what could have been a second or an eternity, suspended in a state of pure, unadulterated shock. My mind was a white-hot static, unable to process the scene before me. The two of them, entangled in our bed, in our home, their casual intimacy a brutal desecration of everything I held sacred. They didn't see me at first. They were in their own world, a bubble of shared secrets and stolen moments. I saw Maxwell murmur something in her ear, and her head tilted back in another peal of that carefree laughter, the sound that had once been my favorite music, now the screech of nails on a chalkboard. A surge of rage, primal and volcanic, erupted from the core of my being. It was an anger so potent, so absolute, that it was almost blinding. My mind wasn't screaming. It was silent. A dead, cold vacuum where thought used to be, replaced by a singular, violent impulse. A voice, cold and reptilian, whispered, asterisk walk away. Leave before you do something you can't take back. Asterisk. But my body wasn't listening. It was an instrument of fury. I didn't walk away. I took a step forward, and then another. I pushed the door fully open with enough force to make it slam against the wall. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. They jumped apart, their laughter choked off mid-note. They looked like guilty teenagers caught by a parent, their faces a comical mask of shock and panic. Amelia's face drained of all color, going from flushed pleasure to ashen horror in a heartbeat. She scrambled to pull the white duvet over herself, her eyes wide with a terror that held no love, only fear of being caught. Jonathan, she stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. But it wasn't her voice that cut through the supercharged silence. It was Maxwell's. He sat up, unhurried, shirtless, smug, his hair artfully disheveled. He didn't look scared. He didn't look remorseful. He looked arrogant. There was a look of contemptuous victory in his eyes that made my blood boil. Well, he said, his voice dripping with a lazy, insolent sarcasm. I guess you weren't supposed to be home, were you? The sheer audacity of it. No apology. No shame. Just a challenge. He was mocking me. In my own home. After sleeping with my wife. The static in my head coalesced into a single, roaring word. Why? But what came out of my mouth was a strangled growl. What the hell are you doing in my house? My voice was trembling, not with fear, but with a rage so profound it shook my entire frame. Maxwell had the gall to shrug, a casual, unfazed gesture that was like throwing gasoline on a fire. What does it look like, Johnny boy? He said, using the old childhood nickname like a weapon. You're always away on business. Someone has to keep your beautiful wife entertained. He smirked, a cruel, triumphant curl of his lips, as if daring me to react. What are you going to do about it? That was it. The final thread of my control snapped. I saw red. The room dissolved into a blur of motion and violence. The next few moments are a chaotic slideshow of images burned into my brain. 1 second I was by the door, fist clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. The next, I had crossed the room and lunged at him. We collided with a force that sent us both tumbling sideways. The heavy, ornate bedside lamp crashed to the floor, the bulb shattering with a pop. He tried to fight back, to push me off, but I was fueled by something he couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just anger, it was the explosive force of a life's worth of trust being detonated. My fists, objects that had only ever signed contracts and held my wife's hand, became hammers. I connected with his smug face, once, twice. I felt the give of flesh and bone, a grunt of pain. He swung wildly, catching me on the side of the head, but I barely felt it. It was Amelia's screams that finally broke through the red haze. Jonathan, stop. Stop it. You're going to kill him. Her voice, pleading, for him. The sound of her defending him only stoked the inferno inside me. It was the ultimate betrayal. I grabbed Maxwell's arm, the one he was using to shield his face, and twisted it. I put all my weight, all my rage, all my pain into that single motion until I heard a sickening, wet crack. He howled, a raw, animal sound of pure agony. He clutched his now limp, grotesquely angled arm, stumbling back and crashing into the mahogany dresser. Vials of Amelia's perfume smashed on the floor, releasing a cloying, sweet scent that mixed with the metallic tang of blood from Maxwell's split lip. You're lucky that's all I did, I spat, my voice a low, dangerous rasp. I was breathing heavily, my knuckles raw and screaming. I looked at him, crumpled and whimpering, his bravado gone, replaced by shock and pain. Get the hell out of my house. Now, before I really lose my temper. Maxwell glared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and fear. He muttered something about calling the police, a pathetic, empty threat. He didn't stick around to follow through. He snatched his shirt from the floor with his good hand and bolted, stumbling out of the room and down the stairs like a kicked dog. I heard the front door slam shut behind him. And then there was silence. A thick, suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of Amelia's ragged sobs. She stood by the bed, clutching the bedsheet around her like a flimsy shield. Tears streamed down her face, carving clean paths through her makeup. She looked broken, pathetic. I felt nothing. No pity. No sadness. Just a vast, cold, echoing emptiness. And disgust. Jonathan. I'm so sorry. She choked out, the words dissolving into another wave of sobs. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman I had vowed to love, honor, and cherish. The woman whose face had been my North Star. And I felt a wave of sorrow so profound it nearly buckled my knees. It wasn't sorrow for her. It was for the man I used to be, the man who had believed in her. He was dead, and she had killed him. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, leaving her alone in the wreckage she had made. The car was an extension of my rage. I drove aimlessly, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape. The city lights smeared past the windows, a meaningless blur of neon and concrete. I had no destination. I was just running, not from the scene, but from the implosion inside my own head. Maxwell's mocking voice echoed in the sterile cockpit of the car. What are you going to do about it? The words were a repeating mantra of humiliation. And Amelia's face flashed before my eyes. Not the tear-streaked, panicked face from moments ago, but the other face, the one I'd seen in the mirror's reflection. The face of pure, ecstatic joy. For him. That was the image that twisted the knife. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch the windshield until it shattered. I wanted to hit something, anything, to find a physical release for the storm that was tearing me apart. Instead, I pulled over into the deserted parking lot of a public park we used to frequent. In the before, we'd walked our dog here, back when we had a dog, back when we were a wee. I cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. I buried my face in my hands, the rough texture of my palms scraping against my skin. The cool night air seeped through the open car window, but it did little to cool the fire coursing through my veins. It was a strange, toxic cocktail of emotions. The white-hot fury was the surface layer, but beneath it was a deep, arctic current of grief. The life I had, the man I was, had vanished in the space of a single, slammed door. An hour passed. Maybe two. I don't know. Time had lost its meaning. The city's glow began to soften as the night deepened. Eventually, the initial, violent surge of adrenaline subsided, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. But the rage hadn't disappeared. It had simply cooled, solidified, from a raging fire into a hard, sharp blade of ice in my chest. I knew I couldn't just run away. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. I turned the car around and headed back to the house. I had no plan, no clear idea of what I would say or do. I just knew that the silence and the running were a coward's game. The confrontation was not over. It had barely begun. When I walked back into the house, the first thing I noticed was the smell. The cloying sweetness of Amelia's shattered perfume bottles mingled with the faint, metallic scent of blood. It was the smell of desecration. She was sitting on the living room couch in the dark. She had pulled on one of my old, oversized sweaters. It hung off her small frame, a pathetic attempt to cloak herself in a familiarity she had just annihilated. Her face was pale in the sliver of moonlight coming through the bay window, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up as I entered, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but couldn't form the words. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at her. The architect of my ruin, sitting amidst the invisible rubble. I wanted to yell, to demand, to accuse. But the rage had become something colder, more controlled. All I could manage was a single, frigid question that cut through the silence. How long? Amelia flinched as if I'd struck her. Jonathan, please. I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. A terrible. How long? I repeated, my voice rising, each word a chip of ice. I would not allow her to deflect. I would not allow her to frame this as a singular mistake. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her twisting hands. Then, a whisper, so quiet I almost didn't hear it. A few months. Months, asterisk. Not days. Not weeks. Months. The word landed in the center of my chest like a block of granite. All those business trips. All those late nights I'd called, picturing her alone in our bed, reading a book. All those girls' nights. It wasn't a crack. It was a chasm that had been widening for months, and I had been standing on the other side, waving happily, completely oblivious. Why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper now, hollowed out by the revelation. Amelia looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I don't know, she began, the classic coward's defense. You're always so busy, Jonathan. You're never here. I felt lonely. And Maxwell, he was just there. Lonely. Asterisk, the word was so small, so inadequate, so insulting. Lonely. I repeated, the word tasting like poison in my mouth. An incredulous, bitter laugh escaped my lips. You felt lonely. So you slept with my best friend. In our bed. Is that how it works, Amelia? Is that the solution for loneliness? She winced at the brutality of my words, but she didn't deny them. Her silence was a confession, more damning than any words could be. Do you have any idea what you've done? I continued, my voice trembling now, the cold control starting to fracture. You didn't just betray me. You destroyed us. Everything we built. Everything I worked for. Every late night. Every sacrifice I made. I told myself it was for us. It's all gone. For what? A few stolen moments with him. Her tears started again, silent streams tracking down her pale cheeks. But they did nothing to soften the resolve that was hardening inside me. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. I made a mistake, she said, her voice barely audible. I know I hurt you, but I still love you, Jonathan. Please. Don't let this be the end. I laughed again, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the quiet room. Love? Don't you dare talk to me about love, Amelia. You don't know the first thing about it. You don't desecrate the things you love. You don't shatter the people you love. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet, elegant tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, marking the seconds of our dead marriage. I looked at her, really looked at her, and the woman I had once vowed to love and protect was gone. In her place was a stranger, a ghost. "I need you to leave," I said finally, my voice devoid of all emotion. It was as cold and firm as a surgeon's scalpel. She looked up, startled, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What? You heard me. Pack a bag. Go to your parents' house. A hotel. I don't care where you go. But I can't look at you right now. I can't be in the same house as you. Jonathan, please." She began to plead, standing up, taking a step toward me. "Get out," I shouted, the sound ripping from my throat, raw and visceral. It echoed through the cavernous, silent house, a roar of pure pain and fury. Amelia recoiled as if I'd physically slapped her. The fight went out of her. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. She didn't argue further. She simply turned and walked up the stairs, her footsteps heavy with a finality that was absolute. I stood in the living room, listening. I heard the soft click of a suitcase being zipped, the quiet creak of the front door opening and then closing. When she was gone, the silence that descended was different. It wasn't empty. It was oppressive, heavy, suffocating. I sank down onto the couch, into the spot where she had been sitting moments before, her faint warmth still clinging to the fabric. Part of me, a weak, dying part, wanted to chase after her, to rewind the last few hours, to forgive her, to pretend this had never happened. But the other part of me, the part that had seen her with Maxwell, the part that was now in control, knew there was no going back. I had spent my life building something I thought was a fortress. Now I was left sitting in a pile of broken pieces, and I had no idea how to put them back together. I didn't even know if I wanted to. I leaned my head back, closing my eyes as a profound, soul-deep exhaustion finally took hold. The confrontation was over, but the war inside me had only just begun. The morning after is a cruel country. You wake up for a single, blissful second, your mind a clean slate, and then memory rushes in like a tidal wave, and you're drowning all over again. I woke up on the couch, a crick in my neck and the sour taste of yesterday's rage in my mouth. The house was hollow. It wasn't just quiet, it felt amputated. Every empty space screamed her absence. The air was heavy with the silence of unspoken words and unforgivable actions. Amelia's absence should have brought relief, a cleansing. Instead, it felt like the wound had been left open, raw and exposed to the air, with no bandage to staunch the bleeding. I made coffee out of habit, then sat at the massive dining table we'd bought for all the dinner parties we were supposed to host. I stared blankly at the polished wood grain, my mind replaying the events of the previous day on a relentless loop. Her betrayal, his smugness, my violence. It all felt surreal, like a gritty, low-budget film I'd been forced to star in. The coffee in my mug grew cold, untouched. My phone buzzed on the table, the vibration unnaturally loud in the silence. It was Richard. "Jonathan, just checking in. Did you manage to get the file? Kaido's people are getting antsy." The deal. For a moment, I had completely forgotten about it. The multi-million-dollar legacy project that had seemed like the most important thing in the world 24 hours ago now felt laughably insignificant. I almost laughed out loud at the cosmic absurdity of it all. How could I care about contracts and negotiations when my entire universe had been reduced to rubble? But then, a different thought surfaced. The business. Nexus dynamics. It was the one thing left that was still mine, untainted by her and by him. It was the one part of my life I could still control. Work wasn't a distraction. It was a lifeboat. "I have it," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'm on my way." I grabbed the file from my study, the damn file that had started it all, and headed to the office. I tried to build a wall in my mind, to compartmentalize the chaos of my personal life and lock it away. But the wall was flimsy, and the chaos kept seeping through. At the office, I walked through the motions. My team looked at me with a mixture of awe and concern. They saw the triumphant CEO who had wrestled a giant corporation to the table. They didn't see the hollowed-out man underneath the bespoke suit. "You okay, boss?" Richard asked, his brow furrowed with genuine concern as he handed me a bottle of water. "You look rough." I forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Long night. Let's close this thing." The signing ceremony went off without a hitch. Pens were signed, hands were shaken, polite smiles were exchanged. But I felt disconnected from it all, like I was watching it happen to someone else from a great distance. I was a ghost at my own victory party. When I returned home that evening, the weight of Amelia's absence hit me with the force of a physical blow. Her favorite cashmere throw blanket was still draped over the arm of the sofa. Her well-worn slippers were neatly placed by the door. A half-finished novel lay face down on the nightstand on her side of the bed. Every corner of the house was a reminder. Of her. Of us. Of the life I thought we had. A sudden, violent impulse seized me. I wanted to rip it all apart. To burn the blanket, to throw the books in the fire, to erase every trace of her existence from these walls. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. To destroy the memories felt like admitting they were real, that they had mattered. And right now, all I wanted was for none of it to have ever happened. The first few days were a blur of numb autopilot and savage emotional swings. I'd go from a state of cold, functional anger at the office to coming home and being ambushed by a sudden, gut-wrenching wave of grief that would leave me breathless. I avoided my friends, my family. I couldn't bear their questions, their pitying looks, the well-meaning but useless advice. Isolation was a cocoon. It was miserable, but it was mine. In the silence, my mind became a torture chamber. Maxwell's smug face haunted my waking hours and my dreams. What are you going to do about it? The question wasn't just a taunt. It was a challenge. A gauntlet thrown down. And Amelia? Her tear-streaked face, her pathetic excuses, they were like daggers twisting in my chest. I was lonely. The words were a monument to her selfishness. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself in my study. I opened my laptop and, on a dark impulse, accessed the security camera footage. I had installed the system years ago, after a burglary in the neighborhood. I fast-forwarded through the days, the weeks, and I found it. More than one occasion. Maxwell's car pulling into the driveway in the afternoon. The two of them, laughing as they walked into the house. My house. Watching it, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a cold, clarifying rage. The grief was burning away, leaving something harder and more purposeful in its place. I realized then that sitting in my misery, marinating in my pain, wasn't a solution. It was a surrender. It was letting them win. Forgiveness? The old Jonathan, the one who believed in second chances, might have considered it. But that Jonathan was dead. He died in that bedroom, watching his wife laugh with his best friend. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about humiliation. Maxwell hadn't just slept with my wife. He had challenged my very manhood, my place in the world, with that arrogant smirk. And Amelia hadn't just made a mistake. She had made a calculated choice, over and over, to desecrate our life together. They both needed to face the consequences. Not just the emotional fallout. Real, tangible, life-altering consequences. The question wasn't if I was going to do something. The question was what? And as I sat there in the dark, the damning footage playing on a loop on my screen, the answer began to form. It wasn't enough for them to be sorry. I needed them to be destroyed. I needed to make them feel a fraction of the pain I was feeling. I needed to dismantle their lives, piece by piece, just as they had dismantled mine. The path forward was no longer about healing. It was about retribution. The decision to pursue revenge wasn't a lightning strike of inspiration. It was a slow, cold dawn. It rose from the ashes of my grief, a bleak and determined light. The anger that had been a wild, chaotic fire was now being forged into a weapon. It had a purpose. It had a target. 2 targets. I started with Maxwell. His betrayal was, in some ways, the more galling. Amelia's affair was a wound to the heart. Maxwell's was a spit in the face. He had broken a sacred, unspoken code. He had stood beside me at my wedding, clapped me on the back, and called me brother. His smugness, his challenge, what are you going to do about it? Demanded an answer. A broken arm wasn't enough. That was a fleeting, physical pain. I wanted to inflict something deeper, something that would last. I wanted to strip away the facade he had so carefully constructed and expose the pathetic, fraudulent man underneath. I knew who to call. Daniel Sterling. We'd been in the same fraternity in college, a lifetime ago. I was the studious one. He was the one who could find out anything about anyone. He had a natural talent for uncovering secrets, a skill he had since monetized into a lucrative career as a private investigator for high-powered corporate clients. He owed me a favor. I'd co-signed a loan for him when his business was just starting out, a gesture he'd never forgotten. I met him at a dimly lit, old-school bar downtown, the kind with darkwood and the smell of whiskey and leather. Daniel hadn't changed much. He still had the same restless energy, the same sharp, observant eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Jonathan Hale," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "You look like hell." "I feel like hell," I admitted, sliding into the booth. "I need your help, Dan. It's personal." I laid it out for him. The affair. The confrontation. I left out the more violent details of the fight, but he could read between the lines. I told him what I wanted. I need everything you can find on Maxwell Adams, I said, my voice low and steady. His finances, his business dealings, his personal life. I want to know where he cheats on his taxes, where he hides his money, who he's sleeping with besides my wife. I want every skeleton in his closet, and I want the key. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he took a long sip of his scotch. This isn't business, John. This is scorched earth, he said, not as a judgment, but as a statement of fact. He asked me what I was going to do about it. I said, my voice cold. I'm going to give him an answer. Daniel nodded slowly. Revenge is a messy business. It can consume you. I'm already consumed, I replied. This is just me channeling the fire. All right, he said, pulling out a small, encrypted tablet. Give me a week. And Jonathan? Be careful. Once you start down this road, there's no turning back. While Daniel worked his magic, I turned my attention to the second front of my war, Amelia. The legal battle. I called Margaret Shaw, the most formidable divorce attorney in the city. Her reputation preceded her, sharp, relentless, and completely unsentimental. She was known for dismantling her opponent's cases with surgical precision. Her office was a monument to minimalist power. Steel, glass, and a panoramic view of the city I had once thought I owned. Margaret herself was immaculate, dressed in a severe charcoal suit, her gray hair cut in a sharp bob. She looked at me over the top of her glasses as I sat opposite her large, empty desk. Mr. Hale, she said, her voice crisp. I've reviewed the preliminary information you sent. Let's not waste time. Tell me what you want. She cheated, I said bluntly, the words still tasting like acid. With my best friend. In my house. I have it on video. I want to make sure she gets nothing. The house, the accounts, the investments. Nothing. Margaret listened, her expression calm, her fingers steepled. She wasn't shocked or sympathetic. She was a professional assessing a problem. Adultery is a significant factor, especially with the kind of proof you have, she said, her tone clinical. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad on infidelity clauses. We can argue for a complete forfeiture of shared assets acquired during the marriage. It will be brutal, and she will fight it. Let her fight, I said. I want this to be brutal. Very well, she said, a flicker of something, respect, approval, in her cool eyes. We'll begin by filing immediately. We'll freeze the joint accounts and credit cards. We'll petition for exclusive use of the primary residence. We will cut off her financial oxygen supply. She'll come to the table, and when she does, we will dictate the terms of surrender. Leaving Margaret's office, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The chaos was being organized. The pain was being weaponized. I was no longer just a victim of their betrayal. I was becoming the architect of their downfall. The days that followed were a cold, methodical process of gathering munitions. I forwarded the security footage to Margaret. I went through our shared financial statements, highlighting every lavish expenditure Amelia had made, every clue I had previously ignored. I contacted Gloria, our housekeeper, a kind, discreet woman who had been with us for years. I hated involving her, but it was necessary. I asked her if she had ever seen Mr. Adams at the house when I was away. Her hesitation was answer enough. After a gentle prod, she tearfully admitted she'd seen his car there on several occasions, and that Mrs. Hale had always instructed her to be discreet. Her written testimony would be another nail in the coffin. Amelia called, of course. Her number would flash on my screen, and I would let it go to voicemail. The messages started as tearful apologies, then morphed into confused pleas, and finally, into panicked demands. Jonathan, please, just talk to me. We can fix this. Asterisk. My credit card was declined. What's going on? Did you do this? Asterisk. I got a letter from a lawyer. A lawyer, Jonathan. Are you serious? You can't do this to me. Asterisk. I listened to each message, my expression hardening. Each desperate plea only strengthened my resolve. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry she had gotten caught. She was scared of the consequences. Good. She should be. A week later, Daniel called. I've got it, he said, his voice grim. It's worse than you think. The man isn't just a cheat. He's a house of cards and a hurricane. He sent me the file. It was a digital dossier of a life built on lies. Fraudulent business deals where he'd skimmed from investors. A mountain of debt, mostly from high-stakes online gambling sites. And As a cherry on top, a long-term mistress, a woman named Lisa, who apparently had no idea about his wife, let alone his affair with Amelia. Maxwell wasn't just juggling 2 women, he was juggling 3. I sat in my study, the same room where I'd left the file that had changed everything, and I read through the evidence of Maxwell's sordid life. A slow, grim smile spread across my face. The game was about to begin, and I was holding all the cards. The first move was against Maxwell. It had to be. His arrogance was a debt that needed to be collected with interest. Armed with Daniel's dossier, I felt like a god peering down at an anthill, able to crush any part of it I chose. I decided to start with his professional life, the source of his pride and his flashy, superficial identity. Maxwell ran a boutique marketing firm, Apex Strategies, a name as grandiose and hollow as the man himself. His entire persona was built on an image of success, of being a player in the city's business scene. I was going to burn that image to the ground. I didn't want to just expose him. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in, to experience the slow-motion panic of his world unraveling. I created a series of anonymous, encrypted email accounts. Then, I began to carefully disseminate the information. The first email went to his largest client, a luxury real estate developer. I attached the bank statements Daniel had procured, showing how Maxwell had been systematically overbilling them for services never rendered, funneling the excess into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. I kept the message brief and chilling. Asterisk, you might want to have your accountants look a little closer at Apex Strategies invoices. Some interesting patterns emerge. Asterisk. The second email went to his primary investor, a wealthy but notoriously risk-averse older gentleman. This time, I attached evidence of Maxwell's gambling debts, showing a man spiraling out of control, using company funds as his personal ATM for late-night poker websites. The message was even simpler. Is this who you want managing your money? The fallout was almost immediate. I monitored the situation through Daniel, who had his own sources keeping tabs. Within 48 hours, the real estate developer had launched a full-scale forensic audit and suspended their contract. The investor, spooked, pulled his funding and demanded an emergency board meeting. Whispers started to circulate through the business community. Apex Strategies, once a rising star, was suddenly toxic. Watching it unfold from a distance gave me a grim, cold satisfaction. It was like playing a chess game where my opponent couldn't see my pieces. But it wasn't enough. I wanted to hit him closer to home. The next target was his personal life. This felt dirtier, more intimate, but necessary. Maxwell had built his life on deceit, and I was going to hold up a mirror to every lie. I found his mistress, Lisa, on social media. She was a yoga instructor, her profile filled with pictures of sunsets and inspirational quotes about truth and authenticity. The irony was nauseating. I sent her a message from another anonymous account. You deserve to know the truth about the man you're with. I attached screenshots. The flirtatious text messages between him and Amelia. Photos of him with his wife, Vanessa, at social events. And finally, a summary of his catastrophic financial situation. At first, she didn't believe me. She replied with a furious message, calling me a liar and a stalker. My response was simple. Asterisk, ask him about Amelia Hale. Ask him about the $500,000 he owes to online casinos. Then look at the pictures again. Asterisk. Silence. Then, a few hours later, a single, broken message. Oh my God. Daniel later confirmed through his sources that Lisa had confronted Maxwell in a spectacular, public scene at a restaurant, throwing a glass of wine in his face before storming out. One pillar of his fraudulent life had crumbled. The final, most devastating blow was aimed at his marriage. I felt a pang of guilt about this. Vanessa, his wife, was an innocent bystander. She was a quiet, gentle woman who, by all accounts, adored her husband. But she was collateral damage in a war she didn't know she was in. My sympathy for her was overshadowed by my contempt for him. He had used her, just as he had used everyone else. She deserved to know who she was married to. This time, the delivery was more direct. I had Daniel compile the most damning evidence, the affair with Amelia, the existence of Lisa, the mountain of debt, into a single, neat folder. It was delivered by courier to their home, addressed to Mrs. Vanessa Adams. The explosion was nuclear. 2 days later, Vanessa filed for divorce, her petition citing adultery and extreme financial misconduct. She cleaned out their joint accounts, what little was left in them, and hired the most aggressive lawyer in the city. Maxwell was served with the papers at his office, in front of his few remaining employees. He was ruined. Professionally, financially, personally. He had lost everything. His business was a sinking ship, his wife was leaving him, his mistresses had abandoned him. The cocky, untouchable man who had challenged me in my own home was now a pariah, a broken, humiliated shell. The victory should have been sweet. But as I sat alone in my silent, cavernous house, I found that the satisfaction was hollow. It was like eating ash. Destroying Maxwell hadn't healed the wound Amelia had inflicted. It hadn't filled the void where my trust and love used to be. It was a cold, intellectual triumph, but it brought no warmth, no peace. One evening, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Maxwell standing on my porch. He looked like a ghost. He was unshaven, his expensive suit rumpled and stained. His arm was still in a sling, a stark reminder of our last encounter. His eyes, once full of arrogant fire, were now hollow and defeated. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat, blocking the doorway. I came to say I'm sorry," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I don't know what I was thinking. You were right. I've lost everything, Jonathan. My business. Vanessa, everything. It's all gone." For a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of the old friendship, a ghost of pity for the boy I had grown up with. But then the image of him in my bedroom, smirking, flashed in my mind, and the pity was extinguished by a fresh wave of cold contempt. "You brought this on yourself," I said, my voice like ice. "You built a life on lies, Maxwell. It was bound to collapse. I just gave it a push." He looked up at me then, his eyes pleading. "Was it worth it? Destroying me? Does it make you feel better?" I stared at him, at the wreckage of a man he had become. "No," I said, the truth of it surprising me. "It doesn't make me feel better, but it feels like justice." He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping in utter defeat. He turned to leave, then hesitated. "For what it's worth, she never loved me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She was just using me to hurt you." He walked away then, a broken man disappearing into the twilight. I closed the door, the sound echoing the finality of it all. His words lingered in the air. "She was just using me to hurt you." I didn't know if it was true, or just another pathetic attempt to absolve himself. But it didn't matter. Maxwell was dealt with. Now, it was Amelia's turn. After dismantling Maxwell's life, turning my attention to Amelia felt different. With Maxwell, it had been a campaign of strategic demolition. With Amelia, it was an act of emotional exorcism. I needed to cut her out of my life, not just legally, but psychically. She had spent weeks attempting to breach my defenses, calls, texts, emails, even a desperate, handwritten letter left in my mailbox. Each one was a plea for forgiveness, a lament for her mistake. I had ignored them all. I wasn't ready to confront her. I needed the anger to cool, to settle into something more precise, more formidable. Raw emotion was a liability. Cold resolve was a weapon. When I finally agreed to meet her, it was on my terms. Not our home, not a place filled with shared memories. I chose a small, sterile cafe downtown, a neutral zone with no ghosts. As I waited, stirring a black coffee I had no intention of drinking, I felt a strange detachment. I wasn't the wounded husband anymore. I was a strategist entering a final negotiation. She walked in, and for a moment, the sight of her sent a jolt through me. She looked like a ghost of the woman I married. Her vibrant energy was gone, replaced by a fragile, haunted quality. Her face was pale, her eyes perpetually red-rimmed. She had lost weight. She sat down across from me, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "Jonathan," she began, her voice a reedy whisper. "Thank you for meeting me." I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch, letting her feel the weight of the chasm between us. I wanted her to understand that this was not a conversation between husband and wife. It was a sentencing. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice low and steady, devoid of the heat it had held before. "I need to hear it from you, Amelia. Not the excuses. The truth." "Why him? Why Maxwell?" She looked down at her hands, twisting the wedding ring that was still, absurdly, on her finger. "I told you before." She started, her voice cracking. "I was lonely. You were always gone, always working. I felt invisible, like I was just a part of the house you'd bought. And Maxwell, he paid attention to me. He made me feel seen." I clenched my jaw, a muscle twitching in my cheek. It was the same pathetic, self-serving narrative. So your solution to feeling invisible was to betray me in the most visible, destructive way possible? To sleep with my best friend. I leaned forward, my voice sharp. Don't insult my intelligence, Amelia. This wasn't about loneliness. This was about cruelty. Or maybe it was about boredom. Which one was it? Tears began to stream down her face, but I refused to let them affect me. I had seen too many of her tears. They were a tool, a currency she used to purchase sympathy. The well was dry. It wasn't like that, she said, her voice rising with a desperate edge. I didn't mean for it to happen. He was just there, and I made a terrible mistake. A mistake. I regret it more than you will ever know. A mistake, I repeated, the word dripping with scorn, is forgetting to take out the trash, Amelia. A mistake is buying the wrong kind of milk. What you did was not a mistake. It was a campaign, a series of deliberate choices made over and over again for months. You chose to lie to me every single day. You chose to let him into our home, our bed. So don't you dare call it a mistake. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. But I wasn't finished. And what about Maxwell? What was the end game? Did you think he'd leave his wife for you? That you'd run off into the sunset together? Did you think for one second that a man who would betray his best friend would ever be loyal to you? She shook her head, sobbing openly now. I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. I was stupid and selfish, and I hate myself for what I've done. I hate myself. I wanted to believe her. A small, foolish part of me, a relic of the man I used to be, wanted to believe in her remorse. But the damage was too absolute. The trust was not just broken, it was atomized. I'm filing for divorce, I said bluntly. The words hung in the air between us, cold and heavy as steel. Margaret Shaw is my attorney. Her head shot up, her sobs catching in her throat. She knew the name. Everyone knew the name. It was a declaration of war. And per the terms of our prenuptial agreement, specifically the infidelity clause which you have so flagrantly violated, I am making sure you get nothing. You don't deserve it. Her tear-streaked face became a mask of pure shock, then dawning horror. The reality of her situation was finally crashing down on her. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of her life as she knew it. Jonathan, no, she whispered. Please. You can't. The house, I have nowhere to go. Nothing. That's not my problem anymore, I said, my voice glacial. You made your choice, Amelia. Now you get to live with the consequences. I stood to leave. She reached across the table and grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Her eyes were wide with panic, pleading. Jonathan, please. Can't we try to fix this? I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. We can go to therapy. I love you. I still love you. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. The words came out, cold and final, an epitaph for everything we had ever been. You don't destroy the people you love. I pulled my arm free from her grasp and walked out of the cafe, leaving her there, a solitary, weeping figure in a sea of indifferent strangers. As I drove away, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound and desolate emptiness. But for the first time in weeks, the fog of anger and pain in my mind began to lift. It was being replaced by a stark, cold clarity. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was in control. They had thought they could shatter my life and walk away unscathed. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my love for weakness. And they were both going to pay the price. The divorce was not a battle. It was a siege. With Margaret Shaw as my general, we systematically dismantled any claim Amelia could possibly have. It was a cold, brutal, and meticulously executed campaign. First, the financials. We had already frozen the joint accounts. Now, we presented the court with a detailed accounting of my premarital assets and the growth of nexus dynamics, all of which were protected under the prenup. We then contrasted this with Amelia's spending habits, the designer clothes, the spa days, the lavish girls' trips that I now understood were likely trips with Maxwell. Margaret presented it not as a lifestyle we had shared, but as a parasitic drain on assets she had no hand in creating. It was cruel, but effective. Then, the evidence. The centerpiece of our case was the security footage. Margaret had it edited by a forensic specialist into a damning, undeniable timeline of the affair. In the sterile environment of a preliminary hearing, presented on a large monitor for the judge to see, it was stripped of all human drama and became a cold, hard data point of infidelity. I saw Amelia's lawyer, a young, out-of-his-depth man she'd likely found through a legal aid service, physically flinch as he watched it. Amelia herself sat across the courtroom, looking small and broken. She refused to look at the screen, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking. The final piece was the testimony. Gloria, our housekeeper, provided a sworn affidavit. It was a simple, factual account of Mr. Adams's frequent afternoon visits and Mrs. Hale's instructions to say nothing to me. It painted a picture of calculated, long-term deception. Amelia's lawyer tried to argue for spousal support for a portion of the house's value. He spoke of her emotional contribution to the marriage, of the support she had given me in the early days. Margaret stood up, her presence commanding the room. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the air. The respondent's emotional contribution seems to have been redirected for the past several months. The petitioner built an empire while the respondent was, to put it bluntly, entertaining the petitioner's best friend in their marital bed. To award her a single penny from the fruits of the petitioner's labor would not be justice. It would be a reward for deceit. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense older woman, looked from Margaret to Amelia's lawyer, and then at the pile of evidence before her. Her expression was grim. The ruling was swift and absolute. Divorce granted on grounds of adultery. The prenuptial agreement was upheld in its entirety. Amelia was awarded no spousal support, no claim to any of my assets, business or personal, and no portion of the value of the house. She was, legally speaking, walking away with nothing but the personal belongings she could carry. After the hearing, in the hushed, marble hallway of the courthouse, she approached me. Her lawyer tried to hold her back, but she shook him off. "Jonathan," she whispered, her voice trembling. She looked directly at me, her eyes raw with a pain that, for the first time, felt genuine. "Please, don't hate me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope one day you won't hate me." I stared at her, the woman who had shared my life, now a legal and emotional stranger. The rage was gone, replaced by a vast, weary sadness. "Hate is an emotion, Amelia," I said quietly. "And I'm tired of feeling anything for you at all." Her shoulders slumped as if I'd landed a physical blow. She turned and walked away without another word, a solitary figure disappearing down the long, empty corridor. In the days that followed, I finalized the loose ends. I put the house on the market immediately. I couldn't bear to live there, to walk those halls, to sleep in that room. Every corner was haunted. I instructed the real estate agent to give Amelia 24 hours to retrieve her personal belongings. I wasn't there when she came. Gloria told me about it later. She said Amelia had moved through the house like a ghost, packing her clothes and a few sentimental items into 2 suitcases. She had stood in the living room for a long time, just looking at the bay windows before she left. She didn't cry. She was just empty. The house sold quickly. I took the money and bought a sleek, modern apartment in the heart of the city. It was the antithesis of the sprawling suburban home. It was mine, filled with new furniture, clean lines, and no memories. I had won. By every legal and tactical measure, I had achieved a total victory. Maxwell was a ruined outcast. Amelia was broke and alone. I had my company, my fortune, and my freedom. But as I stood in my new apartment, looking out at the glittering, impersonal skyline, I felt no sense of triumph. Revenge had brought me a kind of closure, a grim sense of justice served. But it hadn't erased the pain. It hadn't filled the gaping void in my life. I had successfully demolished the lives of the 2 people who had wronged me. I had razed their worlds to the ground. But I was still standing alone in the rubble. And a question began to form in the back of my mind, a quiet, insidious whisper. Was it enough? The problem with scorched earth campaigns is that you have to live in the wasteland you create. The divorce was final, the enemies vanquished, but the silence that followed was a victory with no parade. I had proven I was not a man to be trifled with. I had answered Maxwell's challenge. But the question remained, what now? I found myself adrift. My work, which had been my lifeboat, now felt like a gilded cage. The deals, the meetings, the endless pursuit of growth, it all seemed hollow, a game I was playing out of habit rather than passion. The fire that had driven me to build Nexus Dynamics was the same fire that had fueled my revenge. Now that the targets were gone, the flames were banking low, leaving behind a cold, gray ash. My new apartment, with its clean lines and minimalist decor, felt sterile, like a high-end hotel room. It was a fortress against the past, but it offered no warmth for the future. I was surrounded by success, the fruits of my labor, the spoils of my war, but I had never felt more alone. I realized that my revenge, as total as it had been, was incomplete. Maxwell and Amelia had been publicly humiliated, yes, but their shame was still a private affair, whispered about in closed circles. They could, eventually, move to another city, start new lives, and leave their disgrace behind. Their betrayal would become a story they told, or didn't tell. But for me, it was not a story. It was a brand, seared into my soul. I wanted something more. Not more pain for them, but a final, public act of reclamation for myself. I wanted to control the narrative, to take the sordid, private drama of our lives and turn it into a public lesson on consequences. I didn't want to be the victim they had created. I wanted to be the man who had risen above it, unbowed and unbroken. The opportunity presented itself on a silver platter. The annual Meridian Foundation Gala. It was the city's premier charity event, a night where the elite gathered to bid on extravagant auction items, to see and be seen. Amelia and I used to attend every year. It was a staple of our public life as the perfect couple. I hadn't planned on going, but then I heard, through a mutual acquaintance, that both Maxwell and Amelia would be there. It was a desperate, foolish attempt on their part to re-enter society, to prove that they hadn't been completely ostracized. Maxwell was likely looking for new investors. Amelia was probably there as the guest of some pitying old family friend. The moment I heard they would be there, a plan began to form in my mind. A final act. A public crucifixion. I RSVP'd immediately. On the night of the gala, I dressed with purpose. I chose a tailored black tuxedo that was the epitome of understated power. I was not there to blend in. I was there to make a statement. I arrived and moved through the opulent ballroom with a calm, confident air. People greeted me warmly, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. They all knew about the divorce, of course. The city's elite thrived on such gossip. I accepted their condolences with a polite, detached smile, my eyes scanning the crowd. I spotted Maxwell first. He was near the bar, looking haggard and out of place. His rented tux was a size too big, and his usual bravado had been replaced by a nervous, twitchy energy. He was a ghost haunting a party he no longer belonged to. Amelia was harder to find. She was lingering in a shadowy corner, almost trying to make herself invisible. Her dress was simple, elegant, but she wore it like armor. The vibrant light that had once radiated from her was gone, extinguished. She looked fragile, haunted, a porcelain doll that had been shattered and poorly glued back together. I let them see me. Maxwell's eyes widened when he spotted me, and I saw him physically stiffen, his hand tightening around his drink. Amelia froze, her lips parting slightly, her face paling even further. I didn't approach them. That wasn't the plan. I spent the next hour mingling, laughing with business associates, shaking hands, exuding an aura of complete, untroubled success. I wanted them to watch me. I wanted them to see me thriving, to understand that their betrayal had not broken me. It had forged me into something harder, stronger. Then came the centerpiece of the evening, the live auction. The city's most prominent figures offered up luxury vacations, rare works of art, private dinners with celebrities. I had arranged with the foundation beforehand to make a special contribution. When my turn came, the auctioneer announced my name. And now, a very special last-minute addition from Mr. Jonathan Hale, CEO of Nexus Dynamics. A polite ripple of applause went through the room. I walked towards the stage, calm and composed. Mr. Hale has generously donated an incredible experience, the auctioneer boomed. A 1-week, all-expenses-paid trip to a private villa in Santorini, Greece. To give you a taste, he's prepared a short video presentation. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. All eyes turned to the massive screens on either side of the stage. I saw Amelia look up, a flicker of confusion and perhaps a painful memory in her eyes. Santorini had been our dream. But instead of pristine white villas and azure seas, the screen lit up with the grainy, time-stamped footage from my home security cameras. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The room fell into a shocked, tomb-like silence. There, 40 feet high, for the city's entire social and financial elite to see, was the undeniable proof. Maxwell and Amelia. In my home, in my bed, their laughter, their intimacy, their betrayal laid bare for the world to witness. The footage was clinical, unemotional, and absolutely devastating. I stood to the side of the stage, my face a mask of cold composure, and I watched their reactions. Maxwell's face turned a blotchy, furious red. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting around for an escape that didn't exist. He started to push his way through the stunned crowd, knocking over a champagne flute. a man fleeing his own public execution. Amelia simply crumpled. She didn't scream or run. She just stood there, frozen, as hundreds of eyes turned from the screen to her. Her hands flew to her face, a pathetic attempt to hide from the glare of 1,000 silent judgments. I could see the tears streaming through her fingers. The video ended. The screens went black. The lights came up, revealing a room full of shocked, staring faces. I stepped forward to the microphone. The silence was absolute. "My apologies for the unexpected presentation," I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying through the cavernous room. "I decided against the trip to Santorini. Instead, I will be making a direct, 7-figure donation to the foundation." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room, letting it rest for a moment on the spot where Amelia was still frozen. I felt it was more important to make a different kind of investment tonight. An investment in the value of honesty, of loyalty, and of integrity. "Thank you." There was a moment of stunned silence, then a smattering of awkward, hesitant applause. I stepped off the stage and walked calmly towards the exit, not looking back. I could feel their eyes on me, a mixture of shock, pity, and a certain kind of horrified respect. The message had been delivered. Their betrayal was no longer a secret. It was a public spectacle. Their shame was no longer a private burden. It was an indelible stain on their reputations, forever etched into the collective memory of the world they so desperately wanted to belong to. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt empty. The final act was complete. The war was over. I had won, unequivocally. But victory, I was beginning to learn, was its own kind of desolation. The dust from the gala settled slowly, but its fallout was radioactive. The story of my public detonation of Amelia and Maxwell became the city's most enduring piece of gossip, a modern morality play told over expensive lunches and whispered in exclusive clubs. I heard through the grapevine that Amelia had left the city within a week, unable to face the constant stares and whispers. She had fled to live with a relative in some small, forgettable town, her name now synonymous with scandal. Maxwell had vanished completely, his reputation so irreparably damaged that he couldn't find work, couldn't secure a loan, couldn't even get a dinner reservation. They were ghosts, erased from the life they'd coveted. And me? I was the victor. The wronged husband who had exacted a terrible and brilliant revenge. I was feared, respected, and pitted in equal measure. But in the quiet of my sterile apartment, I was just a man who had burned down his own life to make sure his enemies had nowhere to live. The months that followed were a long, slow climb out of the crater I had created. The first thing I did was sell the house. I couldn't bear the thought of it belonging to someone else, but I couldn't live in it. Watching the movers pack up the last remnants of a life that had once been my everything was a strange, disembodying experience. The wedding photos, the books we'd read together, the furniture we had picked out, each item was a ghost. I instructed them to donate it all. I wanted nothing. I threw myself into work, but the old fire was gone. Nexus Dynamics was a well-oiled machine that no longer needed my frantic, all-consuming attention. It ran itself. I found myself sitting in my corner office, staring out at the city, feeling like a king in an empty castle. My friends, the ones who had stuck by me, began to reach out again, cautiously. They invited me to dinners, to golf, to drinks. They were trying to pull me back into the world of the living. I went. I smiled. I played the part. But I felt a chasm between myself and them. They spoke of mortgages and children's soccer games, of office politics and vacation plans. Their worlds were intact. Mine was a reconstructed ruin. The betrayal had left a permanent mark. It had made me cautious, suspicious. I found myself analyzing people's words, searching for hidden motives, unable to take simple kindness at face value. Trust, once a resource I had given freely, was now a currency I hoarded. One evening, sorting through a pile of mail, I found a letter. The handwriting on the envelope was soft and familiar. Amelia's. For a moment, I considered throwing it away unopened. What more could she possibly say? But a weary curiosity got the better of me. The letter was long, written on simple, plain stationery. It was not a plea for forgiveness or a declaration of love. It was a confession. A quiet, unvarnished reflection. Jonathan, it began. I don't know why I'm writing this. I certainly don't expect you to read it. And I don't expect your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted to say that I understand now. In the quiet of this new, small life I've had a lot of time to think. I see everything so clearly now, without the noise and the glamour and the lies. Asterisk. You weren't absent. I was. I was the one who checked out of our marriage long before Maxwell. I was resentful of your success because I felt it diminished me. I was so insecure, so desperate to feel like I was more than just Jonathan Hale's wife, that I did the most destructive thing imaginable. I used Maxwell, not because I loved him, but because he was a weapon to hurt you with. It was cruel and cowardly and unforgivable. Asterisk. Losing you, and losing myself in the process, is the greatest regret of my life. I hope one day you find a happiness that is pure and real, a happiness that you deserve, and that I so carelessly threw away. Asterisk. Amelia asterisk. I read the letter twice. There was no satisfaction in her words, no vindication, just a profound, aching sadness for the two broken people we had become. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I didn't need to respond. Her war was over, too. She was finally facing herself. That letter, in a strange way, was a turning point. It was the final closing of a chapter. Her betrayal was no longer a gaping wound. It was a scar. It would always be there, a part of my history, but it no longer had the power to define my present. I realized I needed to get away. Away from the city, away from the company, away from the man I had become. I booked a flight with no return date. I started traveling, something I'd always meant to do. I went to places where no one knew my name, where I wasn't the CEO of Nexus Dynamics or the man from the gala. I was just a traveler. I hiked in Patagonia. I wandered through ancient temples in Kyoto. I got lost in the labyrinthine streets of Lisbon. I was rediscovering the world, and in doing so, I was rediscovering myself. The anger, the bitterness, the need for control, it all began to slowly, imperceptibly, fall away. My journey of self-imposed exile eventually led me to a small, quiet coastal town in Northern California. It was the kind of place where the fog rolled in every morning, blanketing the world in a soft, gray silence, and the main sources of entertainment were watching the fishing boats come in and debating the quality of the local chowder. It was the furthest thing from the high-stakes, high-gloss world I had left behind. I rented a small cottage on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, and I began to do something I hadn't done in years, nothing. I read. I walked on the beach for hours. I learned the names of the local fishermen. I learned to breathe again. It was in a tiny, cluttered bookstore in the center of town that I met her. Her name was Elena. She was the owner, a woman with laugh lines around her eyes and a sprinkle of gray in her dark, curly hair. She had a kind, intelligent face and a smile that was warm and genuine, not a performance. I was browsing the history section when she approached me. "You've been staring at that biography of Teddy Roosevelt for 10 minutes, she said, her voice a low, pleasant hum. Are you going to buy it? Or are you just trying to absorb it through osmosis? I was startled, but I smiled. I'm considering my options. Well, it's a good one, she said, leaning against a bookshelf, full of bluster and conviction. A man who thought he could bend the world to his will. She looked at me with a knowing, gentle scrutiny. You seem like a man with a lot on his mind. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I wasn't ready. I was still mapping the geography of my own scarred heart. I told her as much, over coffee at the little cafe next door to her shop. I'm not looking for anything serious, I said, the words feeling both honest and defensive. Elena just smiled. Good, she said, stirring her tea. Neither am I. Serious is overrated. How about we just be two people enjoying a good cup of coffee? And that's what we did. We enjoyed the moment. With Elena, there was no pressure, no expectation. She didn't pry into my past, and I didn't feel the need to offer it up. We talked about books, about the sea, about the ridiculousness of politics, about everything and nothing. It was easy. It was refreshing. She wasn't impressed by my money or my past life. In fact, she didn't even know about it for the first few months. She was interested in my thoughts, my opinions, my terrible jokes. She saw me, the man who was left after the fire. Over time, our connection deepened, not with a sudden, passionate blaze, but with the slow, steady warmth of a hearth. It was a quiet, mature thing, built on shared laughter and comfortable silences. She taught me how to trust again, not with a blind leap of faith, but with small, incremental steps. One evening, sitting on the porch of my cottage, watching the sun set over the ocean, I finally told her everything. About Amelia, about Maxwell, about the business, about the revenge. I laid out the whole ugly, complicated story, expecting her to be shocked, perhaps even repulsed. She listened without interruption, her gaze fixed on the horizon. When I was finished, she was silent for a long time. That's a heavy story, she said finally, turning to look at me. Her eyes held no judgment, only a deep, quiet empathy. They tried to break you. They did, I admitted. No, she said, shaking her head. They broke the life you had. They didn't break you. She reached out and took my hand. Her touch was warm, steady. All of that, the betrayal, the anger, the revenge, that doesn't define you, Jonathan. What you do now, who you choose to be, right here, in this moment. That's what defines you. Her words were an absolution. I stayed in that small town. I bought the cottage. I invested in Elena's bookstore, helping her expand it. I still ran Nexus Dynamics, but remotely, delegating more, trusting my team. My life was smaller, quieter, and infinitely richer. Elena and I built a life together, slowly, carefully. It wasn't the grand, operatic passion I had shared with Amelia. It was something better. It was real. It was a partnership built not on illusion and aspiration, but on a foundation of honesty, respect, and two people who had seen enough of life to know what truly mattered. Looking back now, I see the whole journey for what it was. The betrayal, the anger, the revenge, they were all necessary stages of a painful metamorphosis. Maxwell and Amelia were not just villains in my story, they were the catalysts. They had forced me to confront the man I had become. A man so focused on building a kingdom that he had neglected the person he was supposed to share it with. They had shown me the hollowness of a life built on success without substance. They had tried to destroy me, but in the end, they only succeeded in showing me how to rebuild myself. The real victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in my own reconstruction. It was in the quiet moment, sitting on a cliff overlooking the endless ocean, holding the hand of a woman who saw me for who I was, and realizing, for the first time in a very long time, that I was finally at peace. The architecture of my life was no longer a ruin. It was a new foundation, built on the solid ground of a hard-won self. And it was strong enough to withstand any storm.